Given the current COVID-19 global pandemic, the need for social distancing has become more and more important, and having been bored out of my mind during this quarantine, I thought it might be time to start playing Planetside 2 again. After all, there was just a major update, and in conjunction with everyone staying home because of the coronavirus, a huge resurgence of players have returned to the game. Now, I hadn't played since 2016, so there were a lot of changes that I had to get acquainted with. One of which that made me particularly sad was when I tried to pull a scat max and saw that there was no longer the option for slug ammunition. And so I looked it up and found out that it was removed in 2019. Which is disappointing because I used to have a lot of fun using them in Biolab cert farms that may have been accomplishing absolutely nothing towards the tactical advancement of my faction. Without slugs, I started wondering if it would be worth my certs to get some mattocks as a potential pseudo-slug-wielding scattercannon for longer-range combat, given that they have a lot less damage fall-off. And so I decide that it's probably time to stop fantasizing about fictional characters and actually do something productive. To test how much more effective mattocks actually are at longer range, I went on Planetside and started shooting at a wall. I did this 30 times for both scattercannons and mattocks at a range of 10 meters, and then I went up to the targets and took screenshots of where the pellets landed. Using some photo editing software, I highlighted the pellet holes so they stood out a bit more and started tracing the enemy silhouette for later. Now, before I actually got into any calculations, there were some assumptions that I made. First, I assumed that the deviation from the pellet to the target follows a bell curve distribution, and that the vector a pellet will take is calculated by taking the vector from the player to the target and rotating it by that deviation. Now, this next part was a little tricky because it required that I had 2 friends. But after asking around, I managed to convince 2 people to help me out by standing 1 meter apart in front of the target, which I could use as a pixel-to-meter conversion reference. And in return, I told them that I would stare at the back wheel of their harasser for 2 hours. To figure out the average distance of the pellet to the target, I used good old Pythagorean theorem, and so I traced some straight lines and started counting some pixels. Or alternatively, you could just use the handy-dandy pixel counter in the top right corner. Now all I had to do was use those measurements to calculate the length of the hypotenuse. Once that was done, I put all of the distances into an Excel spreadsheet, and you could see that although the exact location of each pellet is random, their statistical behavior in 2 dimensions follows a Gaussian distribution. And then I decided that it's time for a break to go cry in the corner of my room when I realized that no matter how much mathematical jargon I use, my father will still be disappointed he never had a son. Alright, break time's over. The next step was to make a quick program that would act as a shotgun spread simulator. It was made to calculate the average damage a shot does from either gun at any input distance. The simulation was run several times for both guns at distances of 15 to 50 meters, and now that I had the average damage a single shot does at a given distance, it was possible to calculate the gun's DPS by taking into account its rate of fire, magazine size, and reload time. So after conducting all of the calculations and cross-referencing my numbers with some very reliable sources, I was honestly somewhat surprised with the conclusion that both weapons absolutely fucking suck at longer ranges and you're probably better off using falcons to try and snipe enemy infantry. Oh god!